What's a real-life example of foreshadowing that has happened to you? My husband 62 meters and I were getting in the car to go somewhere and a song came on the car radio called Praise You in the Storm by Casting Crowns. This was about 2 weeks before my husband passed away suddenly of massive heart attack. The feeling of dread was so real at the time in the car. I didn't understand, but I do now. God was warning me of the coming storm. I had a dream where my parents' basement flooded. I told them about it and they didn't think anything of it. The next day or so they called me and told me that my dream came true. Their water heater busted and flooded their basement. One of the craziest coincidences I've ever had. Me, casually mentions a unique hobby that one of my friends has. Relative, that's so cool. You should totally marry him. I married him, 6 years later. We just had our first kid. Told my dad if he didn't stop drinking my future children wouldn't have a blood grandfather. Guess who's in a box in my living room? I experienced second sight where I saw getting into a car accident the next day, and I told my partner and I told him how to avoid getting in the accident, and he did the opposite of what I did out of spite, and the car ended up getting totaled. My grandmother called me Morticia all through middle and high school because 90% of my clothing was black or dark colors. Now I'm in school to be a mortician. Oh, the irony and foreshadowing was strong with this one. I've woken up crying every night before the same night a friend or family member has died. Both expected and sudden deaths, and includes pets. I just wake up crying my eyes out with no memory of a bad dream and no explanation. The next day I find out Tex died. What's weirder is I never make the connection, put it down to a nightmare every time. Me, about to do science. Other person in the lab, can I watch? Me, sure, but it's only interesting if something goes wrong. So the building was evacuated and they had to dispose of the entire fume hood as hazmat. Yup, interesting. Seems like every pet and loved one I have ever lost too soon has had an accident or a health scare a few years before they died, but recovered just fine from the first issue. Walk home from work. Hear ambulance sirens. Editor, it's an accident day. I better watch out. I approach bus stop. Stare for half a minute. I probably should take a bus. No, I can't afford it. But I'm so tired though. Nah, it's close enough and I already bought groceries, so I really can't afford it. Besides, it's Friday, so I'll get to regenerate. Keep walking. I get hit by a car crossing the street less than 100 meters further. It's been almost 5 years. I gotta say I still haven't regenerated from that Friday. Lost the job and got over 1.7k USD into debt. I had a dream where I cut my hair and cried a lot. I told my mom and she forced me to cut my hair on November 3, 2020 on 21/13. Now I feel paralyzed every time I see a person with longer hair, including women, can't focus on anything and scared of mirrors, so, yes, I cried a lot. My mom has a psychic she swears by. For years I would tell her they ask leading questions and generalize answers based on what you want to hear and general odds. So she convinces me to go see him. I ask if I will have children soon. Pretty standard question. Odds are normal, people have a 25% chance of becoming pregnant any cycle. I got the standard, I can see you pregnant very soon and you will eventually have 2 kids. 2.5 kids is the national average, right? I tell my mom this and we both know I have been told twice by fertility specialists I can't have kids naturally and we weren't good candidates for IVF. So I'm pretty sold her psychic is a fraud. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks later. I now have 2 kids naturally. The girl I voted best smile in 8th grade, I was the only person to vote for her, I guess? Yeah, we're 25 now and we've been together for 2.5 years. My Mill is a West Virginia girl and sometimes uses words that I, a Northern Ohio boy, have never heard. When that happens I typically challenge the validity of the words she used by busting out a dictionary. One winter day we were talking about the weather forecast and she said, "We're not supposed to get a lot of snow. Just a skiff." I said, "What's a skiff?" She responded, "A skiff of snow means a light dusting." Out came the dictionary. A skiff is a small flat-bottomed rowboat. So we're going to get a small boat full of snow? I smugly asked. Later that night I was watching the local news and the weatherman, who had been forecasting Cleveland weather for decades, summed up his forecast by saying, "We won't get much accumulation, just a skiff of snow." The anchor, with a confused look on his face, asked, "What's a skiff?" The weatherman replied, "A small boat." I never questioned my mill again. I met a guy and fell in love. We did everything together, went to conventions out of town, played card games together, and talked about getting married and having children. I got along really well with his friend. We worked together. It was my big break. He got me the interview and it took me out of dead-end retail jobs. I started making actual money and loved the work I did. I still do that kind of work and absolutely love it. When it got put on second shift, I would wake up at 2 AM to see him before he went home. Then I would go to work at 5:30 am. Sometimes I would go by to drop off food at night. Our coworkers were super happy for us. One day we were post-bank huddling and he looked at me and said, "One day you're going to hate me." He was absolutely correct. Found out he was still married, instead of getting divorced, and they were actively trying to have a kid together. When I was 18, I had a brief thought about an old classmate from primary school, elementary/middle school. I had no reason to think about him. He was just a random old classmate. I also decided to walk past my primary school on my route home from sixth form/high school. I stood outside it and just looked at my old school for a couple minutes. The next day, that same classmate passed away. When my first husband and I were married, we briefly lived in an apartment building in Chicago. I was pregnant when we lived there. I had my first son, then we decided the backslash-burbs were better for our family and moved about 15 miles out of the city. We had another kid, and lived a good life. Fast forward 20 years. My beloved husband dies of a heart attack at 45. After some heavy grief, I decide to start dating. My sister sets me up with this guy. During the first date, we have an amazing connection, everything clicks so well. I feel like I must have met him before, but I can't imagine how that could be possible. 3 or 4 dates in, the feeling doesn't disappear. We go out to dinner, and during the course of the conversation, start talking about our time spent living in the city. He asks where I lived. I tell him. "Are you sure?" He asks. "Because I lived on that street, too." Turns out we lived in the same apartment building at the same time. He remembers trading pleasantries with my husband. He also remembers holding the door open for a pregnant woman multiple times. It was me. We just celebrated our second wedding anniversary and we're very happy.